So we're here with Scott today. And Scott, you just had a birthday. What is
Yes.
one of your favorite things to do on your birthday?
I love going out to eat
Why is that?
because I get to be served.
Well, let's talk about that.
So, Jeremy, thanks for stopping by. Let's talk about the second part of this Sunday's discussion. We talked about transforming relationships and how worship was essential in kind of combating the DNA of fairness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being filled up on who God is in our own life. So, what's the second part of that?
The second part of it is once we have that abundance, once we feel the fruits of the Spirit within us, that we need to show that to others. We need to reflect that to others. And especially in our marriages and our relationships with our spouse, we need to serve as Jesus served. You know, and that is our calling, is to serve others. And what we need to do is look at the way Jesus modeled that servitude. And if we could find areas that he served in that way and reflect that to our spouse, then I think our marriages will be in a much better place.
Yeah. You know, it's that tension, right, of being served and serving, right, is always at an interplay here. And it's really hard when you're not engaged in worship to be free to serve, right? I see how those two relate. Okay, if I'm worshiping and I understand who God is and his love for me, then it frees me up to show that and demonstrate that to others. What would you say are some great places to serve, to show the love of Jesus to our spouse?
I think one of the great things we could do is look at what Jesus did. And if you think about Jesus in his parables or in the way he interacted with the people around him, he was always present with them. And the woman at the well, he was listening to her story. He wanted to hear what was going on. He was not quick to judge. He was quick to lift up and encourage. He was quick to heal. He was always quick to heal people, to feed people, to nurture people around him. And I think if we look at the model that he set in that, we can find ways to serve our wife or serve our spouse. Another thing he did, if you think about it, he also fought people. He fought the Pharisees. You know, he stood up for what was right. And I think we're also being called to serve in a way where we stand up for our spouse. We stand up in those situations.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, you just tackled a mouthful there. So the first thing is that Jesus listened to people, and you mentioned the woman at the well, someone who came against him. So imagine the next time we're in an argument with our spouse, we're listening for them, even if it feels like we're being talked against. Right?
yes.
That's huge. That's a great way to serve. You also mentioned that he healed people. Now, I don't have the power to heal people physically, but I do think there's probably things we can do to heal people, especially our spouse. What are some ways that we could do that?
Well, just being present with our spouse in places where if they're physically ailing, that's one thing. What if they're emotionally ailing or they're mentally ailing in some way? You know, to be present and to be intentional with that time. Sometimes healing just feels like a touch.
Yeah.
Sometimes healing just feels like a warm meal being served. You know, so there's ways that we can heal each other, and I think that's one of the things we have to do is speak into each other in that way.
Yeah, well, I have 2 middle school daughters now, and I have a healing ministry called Hugging. There's no way I could possibly go up and down with the emotional spins that we go through during the week, but I find myself hugging them a lot.
Yes.
And that is an amazing way to begin to bring healing. And then you also talked about making food. He had this wonderful time of making thousands of people satisfied with a few fish and a couple loaves. So talk about how we could provide meals and serving the daily tasks, how that would help.
Well, you know, Jesus said whenever he's talking to his disciples, I came to serve, not to be served. And so in that, he even, he gave scripture that said, that was his purpose here on life. And so through that, we should be able to look at that ministry and say, this is something we can do. We serve our children all the time, but being able to serve our spouse in a way that they can receive. And maybe that's through food. Or maybe that's, maybe it's another language that they receive. Maybe it's through a note. Maybe it's through a small gift. But there's ways that our spouses can receive this these gifts, and we need to be able to be prepared to give in that way. And it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned fighting, and one of the things I see Jesus doing in the scripture a lot is fighting, right?
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily picking the fights, but Pharisees would invite him over for dinner, and of course there would be a man with a withered hand. It happened to be the Sabbath. Oh, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, look what we have here.
But yet he did it with a different quality than I think we understand fighting. Explain a little bit of that, what you say fighting for our spouse, standing for them.
Yes, I think that what we see in Scripture is Jesus standing up for what is right. You know, standing up for healing on the Sabbath, standing up for, you know, being able to serve. He stood up for these things, and he called out the Pharisees for what they were doing against God's will. And so in the same light, I think that whenever, you know, our spouse is in situations where they need a companion to come alongside them and to stand up for them, to stand up for that right, we just got to be ready to be understanding of what their circumstance is and be able to speak into it with the Lord's words. Not with ours, but with what the Lord would say in that situation. And that's what Jesus did. He would stand up and say, this is what the Lord really does say. And so that's on us to make sure that we have that wisdom ready for our spouse.
That's right. Well, any final challenge for serving?
This week, I think what we really want to do is stop focusing on being fair. Stop focusing on that. Focus on worshiping the Lord, and then focus on the opportunity to serve our spouse. And really serve in a meaningful way that comes from a place of abundance. Not where it comes from, I want to get this back in my time, but really comes from a place of, I have so much, I just want to give it away. So I think that's the challenge this week. Can we serve in that way?
Okay. Well, here's what I want you to do. Instead of you telling us about how you served your spouse this week, I want your spouses to brag on your him or her and how they have served you this week. So let's brag. Put it in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. So thanks for tuning in. I hope this encourages us all to serve our spouse as Jesus served us.